to make a request to those who are on Zoom. If you would all mute right now, that will help us to not have the interference of the voices while we're having the program. And now we've got a really special video that we're going to show here. Hopefully you can see that at home. Special thanks to Linus, who knocked it out of the park, I think, with that video. And thank you to everybody that sent in pictures and sent in your years of service and your rank. Thank you more than that for your service to our country. Veterans Day, obviously, coming up next week, and we want to remember all those who serve, give us the freedoms that we have today. Also, you should definitely ask Sid Smith about his photograph. He has stories to tell. All right, now Jane Covington will go around and introduce our guests, visiting Rotarians, and we'll follow that up with some happy bump.
Thank you, Keely. This seems to be the guest area of the room today. Start with Beth Dormany. Beth has a guest.
Okay, this is my good friend, Allison Martin. She's with Warrior Medical, but more importantly, she's also on a board for Tennessee Youth, which is, or not Tennessee Youth, International Youth, which is also has a project that's Code Red. And I'm still learning more about it, so I'm stumbling a little bit here, but it's for the well-being of youth, mental health. They also do school safety, human trafficking. But her son, Jack Martin, just graduated with my son. So they both went off to college. He's at Auburn. And you met him several times because both of our children were part of the Tennessee State Distinctive Volunteerism Program. And so they came to a lot of different, the Harpeth River cleanup and pancake breakfast. And they did a lot of different local services with us. So you may have seen her out there too in the ditches with the shovel and picking up trash. So welcome my friend Allison Martin.
Dan Jordan has a guest to introduce.
My guest today is Lisa McHugh, who owns and operates a lifestyle shop across the street, Vignette. She's been there for a number of years, well-established local merchant in Brentwood, and happy to have her as our guest today. She's got her Christmas out, everything ready for Christmas. Great place to go shop, get an early jump on the shop.
I'll second that. It's my favorite store. It's right across the street. You can walk there after Rotary. And we also have a couple of friends from the Williamson Herald with us today. We have Tori Kiefer, who is here with us in person, and I think Jody Rawl was going to join by Zoom. Any other? Do we have any other guests on Zoom? Anybody else? I didn't see any. Okay. All right. So now we will move right along to Happy Bucks. Anyone happy today?
17 happy bucks because I think I owe 15 for just my first meeting in person since I was happy on our anniversary back in May, so 15 years, and 2 more to grow on that. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Who else is happy? Any happy? Alan Treadway, you happy?
Put $5 in. Isn't that amazing? I know. I borrowed it from you. Hey, shout out to Larry Kane. I thought I sent in my reservation, but evidently it didn't go through. So I'm eating somebody's lunch here. So thank you very much.
Devin is happy.
I am happy this week technically on the 27th of October, but formally next Sunday, so a week and a few days from now, my son will be awarded the Eagle Scout rank within the Boy Scouts of America. And that's something to be very proud and happy of. The fun thing is I decided I would actually take him. He's 16. He could have driven himself to his Eagle Board of Review. If you're an Eagle Scout, you know what that is. As I drop him, I kind of drop him off. I said, good luck. I'll be out here whenever you're done. I peered through the window, and looking back out the window and kind of waving at me is Rod Freeman. So it was he had a treat to be able to sit with his Eagle Board with a good friend.
Awesome. Anybody else happy?
Hey, Jane,
Yes.
this is Sarah. We actually have a guest, Butch Ely from the governor's office is joining us via Zoom.
Oh, that's great. I have heard great things about Butch Ely from my good friend Liz Alvey. So happy to have her.
Welcome, Butch.
Any other happy bucks? All right, thank you.
All right. We are going to move rapidly through our remaining announcements out of respect for our speaker's time. We want to give him as much time as possible. So just be aware that we are still about 50 people short on pledges for our foundation drive. So if you are one of those 50 people that has yet to return in your pledge form, please do so ASAP. Banquet registration, similar story. We're missing 50 responses or so, 50, 60 responses. So please get those responses to Sherry ASAP. I know this is definitely the most disappointing news we're all going to hear today, but we're not going to have time for trivia today. So yes. So with no further ado, Ray Little is going to introduce our esteemed speaker today. Ray?
Thank you, Keeley. It is a distinct honor to have the governor with us today. Little introduction, a little background. Many of y'all know, but Bill Lee's a 7th generation Tennessean and the 50th governor of Tennessee. He was raised in Franklin, where he still resides today with his wife, Maria, on the family farm. And I'd like to give a shout out to Maria. During this pandemic, she's been very active serving the state, helping those with food insecurities, which is always an issue, but has especially been a large issue in the last few months. Bill's the proud father of 4 adult children and 8 grandchildren. He attended Williamson County schools. He then attended Auburn University, where he studied mechanical engineering. And after graduation, he returned home to Franklin and joined the family business his grandfather started in 1944. He became president of Lee Company in 1992. During his first year in office, Governor Lee passed a series of legislative initiatives to strengthen career and technical training, expand school choice, pursue criminal justice reform, improve public safety, and sharpen the effectiveness of government. His administration is also focused on the accelerated transformation of rural Tennessee. Under his leadership, Tennessee was named the #1 best fiscally managed state in the country, the best business climate in the U.S., #1 in the nation for advanced industry job growth, and the best state for small business growth. The governor and first lady are people of strong faith. They are active in Grace Chapel Church and in numerous faith-based ministries, which have taken them all over the world to serve people in need. I am very thankful Bill Lee is my governor and appreciate that he has kept personal liberty coupled with personal responsibility as we try to maneuver through this COVID-19 health crisis. It is my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome the governor of the great state of Tennessee, Bill Lee.
Thank you, Ray Little. I appreciate those words, and I appreciate your great friendship and kindness to me throughout this process, especially from the very beginning of our run for governor, when it was unknown whether that was going to happen or not, but you were a great support from the very beginning. I'm grateful for that. In fact, today is 2 years ago from our election. My wife and I this morning shared some pictures from 2 years ago, and it's been quite a interesting 2 years, especially quite an interesting last 7 months of those 2 years. Challenges that we never anticipated that we would be facing, but happy to be in the spot. And happy to join my fellow Rotarians today. Thanks for having me. You just might get trivia after all. I'll try not to be too trivial in my comments, but I'm honored to be here, and I'm actually on the road today, so I pulled over, and technology allowed me to join virtually. So I'm really proud to be here. I'll make a few comments, talk a few minutes, and then certainly do some Q&A. That's probably the best way for me to answer questions that you have, is to hear from you on what you want to talk about. But I'll start off with what we talk about in our administration right now. We had, as Maria and I said, things were going so good in February, and then in March we had these enormous tornadoes that were tragic and horrific that we had to deal with. Within a couple of days, we had our first COVID case. Since then, we've had the most rapid economic collapse in the history of the country. We had the pandemic that has shaped all of our world in a different way. And we had civil unrest that has created and elevated conversations in this country that haven't been elevated to this degree since the civil rights movement. So we've had a lot to deal with, but it's been challenging, but it's been inspiring in a lot of ways too. So we took, with regard to COVID, because it impacted so much of what's happened this year, and frankly, what will happen in the coming few years in our administration, primarily because of the budget constraints put in place by the economic downturn. We decided to attack this with a very targeted approach, and we set up something called Unified Command Group. We brought together health and TEMA and the Department of Military, and then we brought in education and economic reform. But we put together a group that meets every morning and has since March. We meet every morning around the table, and we talk about our targeted approach. And as the pandemic changes and we learn more, how we adjust to the changes. But, we started off, you mentioned I have an engineering degree, so I am a person who makes decisions based on data. and information. So early on, I looked and saw that, testing was very important. Tennessee became one of the best tested states in the country. Because of that, we were able to mitigate the impact of the virus early on. Also, we didn't know what was coming. So we made a lot of decisions across this country in order to stop what we didn't know, but to at least mitigate it. That was, with business restrictions and stay-at-home orders and really shutting down. Our state was one of the last to shut down and one of the first to open up, because I believe that was a very temporary approach to get our hands around what we were dealing with. But our targets have been the vulnerable population, first state in the country to announce that we would test every resident of every nursing home. We've continued that very focused, targeted approach to nursing homes. In fact, opened up what we call COVID-specific nursing homes to alleviate hospital capacity challenges. We had this targeted testing approach, and then we began to implement a series of strategies that primarily were focused on keeping our hospital capacity where it needed to be. We continue that process with funding for staffing for our hospital providers. We developed a tremendously strategic partnership with the Tennessee Hospital Association. So we've worked really hard on hospital capacity, and we've worked hard on mitigating the spread and understanding where it is and who has it, and focusing our efforts on the hot spots around the state as they pop up. We're in the middle of a second surge, really the third surge, but primarily the second major one in our state. We're cautiously optimistic where that is, although we have a tremendous challenge right now with hospital capacity, but we're managing that process as well. And we've begun our plan for distribution of vaccine, which ultimately will be another very important tool in overcoming the medical side of this pandemic. So keeping citizens safe is a primary concern, but not only the lives of Tennesseans, but the livelihoods of Tennesseans has been very important to me. As a former business guy and a person who ran a business, owned a business, keeping businesses open, keeping jobs when we had a 16% unemployment rate immediately after the pandemic hit, we began to target an approach to get people back to work. Fortunately, we're down to about 6% unemployment in our state. We are aggressively pursuing re-employment strategies with that set of our population that continues to be unemployed. We have opened up in the 89 counties that the state has authority over with regard to the health departments. We've opened up all of our businesses and lifted restrictions from gatherings and businesses to make sure that the economy could continue to move forward. And we're incredibly encouraged by where the economy is headed right now in Tennessee. We are overperforming in our projections initially with regard to revenues in the state of Tennessee. That's a good thing for everybody. So our strategy has been lives and livelihoods, and it has been quite a challenge, but we are very optimistic about where this is headed. I spend a lot of time talking to other governors. We work together as a team, many of us. There are a group of us governors that call every week and talk about the strategies that we're implementing in our state. And we've had a tremendous relationship with the federal government, and the Trump administration has been very helpful to us as a state in providing the support that we need to get the things done that we have to get done. So another big piece of, as I think about the federal government, the CARES Act funding and our distribution of CARES Act dollars that came from the federal government. Every state had a lot of leeway in how they could do that. We chose, and I chose, and Butch Ely, who's on the call, our F&A commissioner, who's a brilliant business guy, and I'm so grateful that I have him. We chose to, first of all, make sure we spent that money on the health piece as necessary. So making sure we had PPE for businesses, for our healthcare workers, funding for staffing for healthcare. We made sure that we had funding for testing. We're one of the few states that offers free testing for everyone in our state, symptomatic or asymptomatic. And that testing strategy has been a good one. But we funded all of those health components. But then we decided to take the largest portion of our CARES money and inject it back into the economy. So we set aside a couple $100 million for business relief through 3 different business relief programs that are underway right now. The most recent being called Surge, which is a business grant program to companies that have struggled. The largest component of our CARES Act money has been spent to maintain a balance, an appropriate balance in our unemployment insurance trust fund. So we were one of the first states to determine that we would maintain a balance in our trust fund that would mean that no businesses in Tennessee would be required to pay a higher level of premium for their unemployment insurance, which in effect would have been taxing businesses. And in my view, the worst thing we could do in an economy was create an additional tax or an additional burden on businesses. So that business relief funding, along with that funding of the trust fund to make sure businesses weren't punished under the environment, has been our number one focus. We also gave significant funding, $60 million in broadband expansion, so people could work from home, get healthcare from home, and educate from home. That was an important step we took. We also have provided $150 million for nonprofits all across our state who are key to really solving some of the greatest challenges that we face in a crisis like this. I don't think government's the answer. Government can create an environment, but the business community, the nonprofit community, the people are the answer. And so to the degree that we can take that funding and push it out to the people. And to that end, we also gave $150 million to local governments so they could address the challenges they had and not have to raise taxes locally through property tax increases, for example, in the vast majority of our counties. So that's been our strategy from an economic standpoint. I'll comment a little bit too on what has been super important to me, and that is education and keeping our kids in school to the degree that we could. We all know there's been significant learning loss as a result of kids being out of the classroom for months. We decided that we should do everything we could to make the environment safe for teachers and kids, but to kick kids back into classrooms. And every district in the state of Tennessee, except for one, has in-person classrooms operating in the state now. The vast majority of our school districts have the vast majority of their kids in school. So we have about 700,000 out of 1 million kids going to school in person. And we know that the learning loss is significantly less when a kid is in person in classroom. Add to that nutritional support, mental health services, services for those with disabilities. All of those things are a part of kids being in the school building. And so we've been really proud of the efforts that our Department of Education has made and we have made to make sure that kids get back into school. And we also know, by the way, that most parents want their kids to be in school. My view is that parents deserve that choice. And so we've given parents a choice. If they want to learn online in any district in the state, they can do so. But the vast majority of parents want their kids in school. And so we've created an opportunity for them to do that. The other thing about schools is they're a huge economic driver, especially in rural communities. So when schools are operating, schools are oftentimes one of the largest employers in a county. And to make sure that and when kids are in classroom, their parents can go to work. You know, I had a couple of personal experiences before I became governor. I mentored kids in the inner city through a at-risk inner city youth program. And I often, as I tried to set policy around education, I thought about this kid that I mentored for 5 years that was mom was in prison and didn't know his dad, and his grandmother struggled with a lot of challenges to raise him. And I thought often about what it would be like for him if he were not in class, and if he were not going to school, and if he were sitting in his housing development alone day after day after day, and it drove my decision making. That one kid being representative of hundreds of thousands of children, it drove my decision making on where we need to go in education. And I mentored guys coming out of prison too, through a prison ministry reentry program. And one of the fellows that I mentored is continued to be a longtime friend of mine 10 years after he's been out of prison. And I remember talking to him early in the pandemic, and he couldn't go to work because his kid was at home and his child is autistic. So childcare was not easy for him. And I remember thinking, this guy can't stay home. Like, he has to go to work to provide for his children and to create his livelihood. So those kind of stories about real people that were affected have and besides being a business guy who knows that companies shutting down and small businesses losing their future was incredibly important to me as we've navigated our way through this. So that is where we stand today. I will say, and I'll close off my comments here and we get to questions. It's been a rough 7 months for the entire nation, but I'm incredibly hopeful for where we're headed. I believe that I know in my own life, the most tragic seasons of my life were the most transformational. The times in my life where I had the greatest challenges were the times where I learned more about what life could be on the other side, whether that's through the lessons we've learned through technology advancement in healthcare, through the conversations and civil unrest that are going to be necessary in order for us to become a more perfect union. We're in the middle of crisis, but that means that we are on the brink of what I think will be a very hopeful season ahead as we navigate through this. So I have a great deal of hope. Tennesseans have come together. We'll continue to do so. Our nation will heal. We will work together to advance the things that we need to do in this state and in this country. We're already working on our legislative agenda for the next session. We're getting back to work on what happens as we move forward, as our economy recovers and we have funding again, and we get this pandemic behind us, which will be, I don't know when that's going to be, but it's going to be. And when it does, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of great work to do. And we've begun that process, and we'll continue that on. And I'm inspired by the opportunity that lies before us. So I also will say, I'm mindful of this election we had 2 years ago and the stunning transformation that made on my life, but the incredible honor it has given me to serve you there and the people of this state, and to just have the privilege to do what it is that I do. So I'm grateful for that every single day. I'll stop talking and open it up for your questions.
Thank you so much, Governor Lee. We'll go around, and again, I'm going to remind everybody to go ahead and put your mask on if you haven't already, and speak only into the microphone, and we'll take some questions. Steve Grissom.
Oh, Governor Lee, this is Steve Grissom, and I'm not going to ask you a political question. I'm not going to try to trick you up. I just wanted you to know I am one of the best friends with your best employee. Do you know who that is?
Well, that's tricking me and putting me in a corner, don't you think?
I promise. Carol Ann K. Osborne is, I grew up knowing Carol Ann, and I know she's your assistant. And just wanted to shout out and say hi to Carol Ann. And I know she's enjoyed working for you. So I appreciate what you do.
Thank you for that. She is a great employee, and she keeps the trains on time around my office.
Also, if there's anyone on Zoom that would like to ask a question, go ahead and indicate that in the chat, and Linus and Devin will be monitoring that. And now we have Dale.
Governor, my name is Dale Llewellyn. I wanted to ask a question about COVID-19 and specifically about statistics in terms of cases and positives. Because when they report a case, that means somebody has evidence. That individual that's being identified has definitely been tested and is positive, or if somebody coming through contact tracing because of somebody positive.
So I wish I had Dr. Piercy on the call to make sure that I answer all technical questions right. But I do know the answer to that one, and it means that there's one of two things. That person is either tested positive with what we call a PCR test, or they have tested with an antigen test that indicates, and we call those probable, but they have actually tested positive through a secondary type of test that follows up with a PCR test. So the only cases that are recorded as actual cases are people that have been that have tested positive with what we call a PCR test, and those tests are highly accurate. And so those are the ones that are reported as positive. The ones that are probable have tested positive with a test, but it's with an antigen test that has a less specificity than a PCR test. Now, what's interesting is, and I'll just add this caveat, more and more people are being tested with antigen tests because they're widely available. We're going to get 2 million antigen tests, and the antigen tests, y'all, are the ones that are quick tests where you can take it and within 10 minutes you know the answer to that test. They're not as effective. They're not as accurate as PCR tests. They turn around quickly, so they're very useful and very helpful in the right circumstances. But you're going to see more and more what we call probable, and we list them as probable because they generally require a follow-up to confirm. So we don't call them as positive, we call them probable. But you're going to see more and more probables because there's more and more of those kind of tests being done out there.
All right, we're going to take one more from the live audience, and then I'm going to have Linus take a couple from the chat.
Hey, Governor. Wanted to get you to speak a little bit on economic development and in particular corporate relocations. I know California, past few years, has been a lot of movement to Tennessee for economic reasons. So maybe you could just give a summary on that.
Governor, I apologize. We've lost your feed. We lost your feed right as you began that answer. So if you don't mind.
Can you hear me now? Have you got my feedback?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So economic recovery is it's very important, obviously, to our state. And I do a lot of, I actually really enjoy that part of my job. I enjoy the whole job, but some parts not so much. But that part I really enjoy, going to companies to recruit them into our state. We do a lot of that. We're a very business-friendly state, and particularly so, we're finding that out in the last 7 or 8 months. There are a lot of companies that are beginning to show a real interest in leaving states that have been particularly restrictive to them. So we have a lot more activity right now in conversations with companies to come into Tennessee, but we are also at the same time, we're kind of reevaluating the way we incentivize companies in here to make sure that we're making sure we get the right kind of companies that are producing the right kind of jobs in the right kind of locations that we want them to be. I have a particular interest in rural economic development. I think our rural economies are incredibly important. So, yeah, we have a whole department focused on bringing companies into Tennessee. And I met with the company, had a breakfast with their executives just this week to talk to them, and about moving their manufacturing facility here. The vast number of those jobs would end up being Tennessean jobs. And so we do a lot of work there. But I will say a job created in Tennessee is better than one brought here. So while we are working hard to attract companies here, we're also working hard to invest in companies that expand here. So we do a lot of economic development for companies looking to grow and expand their businesses. GM just announced a $2 billion capital investment here. The largest expansion capital investment in the state was just announced a couple of weeks ago. And I hope that answers your questions. We're very aggressive and very robust in trying to create jobs in the state. I wish I had the statistic in front of me of the number of jobs that have come to Tennessee in the last 8 months, but it's significant.
Governor, we have a couple of questions from our club member Tom Carr. First question is, do you have any is there any timeline for a vaccine? And then the second question is, do you think Republicans are going to retain control of the Senate? I guess the question is about the U.S. Senate, and how will a Biden presidency work with such a Senate?
What was the last part of the question? How will what?
How will a potential Biden presidency work with Senate?
Vaccine question first. We expect that we'll get the first part of a distribution of a vaccine in the month of December. There are about 4 companies that are going to have vaccines in the next several months, but the first one will be ready to begin its distribution in December. That being said, we will get a very small portion of that distribution. And we publicly provided our plan to Health and Human Services on how we would distribute that vaccine. We're continuing to adjust that all the time, but basically what will happen is we'll get a very limited number. So we have to prioritize where those are going to go. This is a very interesting vaccine in that it's delivered super cold, so it has to be, the distribution of that is difficult. It's going to have to be stored in dry ice, and you can imagine the expansion of that being the first part. It comes in dry ice, and how you manage the distribution of that to people becomes complicated. But we have a very focused effort there. We'll probably that distribution will go first to healthcare workers because hospital capacity is the key. We are straining our hospitals right now. We have a record number of COVID patients in the hospital today, over 1,500, and that's significantly higher than it was in the peak in July. So we recognize we have a healthcare challenge with hospitalizations. You know, people can argue about the number of cases or the number of tests or this or that, but you can't argue with how many people are actually in the hospital with COVID. That's a real number, and it's climbing every day. So particularly because COVID's working its way through our rural communities where we have an older population and a sicker population. But that process will start in December. It'll go to healthcare workers. It will go first to the healthcare workers that are older and have comorbidities or have underlying health conditions, then broader to the healthcare population. It will go to vulnerable populations, elderly with comorbidities. The whole key here is to get the people vaccinated that are most likely to die from COVID or that are most needed to take care of those that are sick. And then you go down the line with, as more vaccine becomes available, you add populations to that. It is a vaccine that requires 2 injections 1 month apart. So we may get 200,000 vials that we have to hold 100,000 back for the second injection. A long answer to, it will start dribbling in December and continue to over the next several months. My screen changed. Are you still seeing me, Ray? Shake your head if you are. Okay. You asked me about the Senate and a Biden administration. Gosh, you know, what's happening on the federal level with elections right now is outside of my pay raise, my pay scale. But and I don't know who the next president's going to be. I don't think any of us really do. I think it's yeah. That's kind of hypothetical at this point. But with regard to the Senate, we also don't know what's going to happen there. So both of those Georgia races now are going to be runoffs. Those two races would determine the balance of power in the Senate. And I can guarantee one thing: Georgia is about to become the center of the political universe. If you think you've had a lot of television commercials for political campaigns, if you lived in Georgia, it's about to be all there is. So that'll happen over the next couple months, and hard to say what's going to happen there. I think probably in both of those circumstances, the Republicans have the advantage at least from a initial polling and vote counting in the previous elections. So, but I don't know what'll happen there either. That's about all I can. With any real knowledge, that's about all I can say about the future of politics in Washington, D.C. I know what's going to happen here in Tennessee, and that's kind of what I'm keeping my focus on.
Leave it to Tom Carr to ask such a softball question. Thank you, Tom. And now we're going to Burt Bradford.
Governor, I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama with a bunch of your KA fraternity brothers. And one specifically, Jeff Brown, wanted me to remind you about the Donkey Kong machine in the basement. Were you the one who rigged it up with 1,000 credits?
Let me just say, I ended up on the front page of the New York Times because of my Kappa Alpha uniform in 1977, if you recall, from 2 years ago. So I have left my college career behind and moved on to today. As you can tell Jeff Brown that he should call me offline about anything that happened in college, because I ain't talking about it publicly.
Governor, this is a question from our club member, Sana Robinson. Sana says, we witnessed your courage and wise leadership in handling the situation on Capitol Hill recently in terms of the protesters who made some rather unreasonable demands. We appreciate your strength in that regard, but wonder if there are other factors that would come into play relative to any larger scale protests relative to the election.
Yeah, so we certainly use the National Guard when the protests were at their height. I think probably in every state in the country, the National Guard has been standing by in case there is civil unrest. We don't expect that to happen in our state, but we would respond in the same way that we have done before, which is making sure that we uphold the rule of law, and lawlessness can't operate in a state, or it shouldn't. I don't think anyone, the vast majority of Americans don't want lawlessness in their streets, and we certainly don't want that here in Tennessee. So our law enforcement responded very well through that process. It's very important that we protect the First Amendment rights of people to have peaceful protests. That's part of the fabric of this nation, and always has been and should be always going forward. And so we want to protect not only those who protest, but private citizens and private property and public property. So that's the goal. And I will say that we are committed to law and order, and we're committed to the protection of the rights of every citizen, and we can accomplish both of those things, and they're both incredibly important to accomplish. We can't let either of those not be existent in our state. So we'll respond accordingly to lawlessness, but we'll also respond accordingly to peaceful protest, and we will allow it at any place at any time in our state.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor Lee, for joining us today. We want to be full of Governor Lee's time. So if there are questions that still need to be asked, send those directly to Devin McClendon. Just kidding. I'm kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that. But in all sincerity, thank you so much, Governor Lee. And I think Ray Little actually wanted to give you a personal note of thanks as well. Ray?
Governor Lee, brother, wanted to appreciate you being here and tell you how much I appreciate your service to us in the state of Tennessee. And one thing I'm thankful for every morning is you wake up every day knowing that Jesus is Lord and he's still on the throne, irregardless of elections or anything. And I appreciate that so much in you. And I also want to thank Butch Ely for being here, a longtime friend, and so thankful for his service to the state too, and to all the citizens, because he's an excellent person to be in charge of our finances. So and also thank you very much and appreciate it, and thank you for your gift of time today.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you for your leadership too in this not only in this community but just to the state. You're right. I wake up every morning and I ask God to give me wisdom and discernment, because there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of advice and there's a lot of opinions and there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of, there's a lot of folks that weigh in, but I know that wisdom and discernment from the Lord is crucial for me anyway. It's in my worldview of how I'm going to make decisions. And so I appreciate your comment there. And I assure you, I'm grateful that you wake up grateful for me. I wake up grateful to be in this spot, but grateful that he does have our future. And he's blessed this country greatly. It's why I have so much hope for the future. And as the word said, hope does not disappoint. So we have much to look forward to in this country.
Thank you again, Governor Lee. Let's give thanks to our speaker. And now, just a couple of closing announcements. Please do remember Lori Reed and the passing of her mother-in-law this week. My family, passing of my uncle Larry Faust and his back issues. Faye McCarthy, Robert and Dottie Fiddler, John Stokes, Roger Wheelwright. I saw Roger on earlier. Please remember all of those folks with the challenges that they're dealing with. And obviously, please do remember our nation as we deal with, I joked earlier, the most disappointing news we'll learn today is that we're not doing trivia. That's clearly not the case for everybody. So we're all struggling with something that's going on in our nation, whether we're on one side or the other. So let's all be mindful of that in our thoughts and prayers as well, obviously. Let's be safe. Larry has one more last announcement as well.
21 people sign up today. We had 21 people sign up today. There's 27 people here right now. 2 people did not eat. So please RSVP. It just takes your name and your email address, and yes, I'm going to be there. That's all you got to do. So please do that. If you bring a guest, like Dan did today, put that guest on there. Bring 2 people, not 1 person, but 2 people. But please do that. We had plenty. We had almost enough meals today. And that's not good enough. We got to have enough meals for everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. You are adjourned.